Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. If there was one thing more dangerous than Tuppence Beresford with a free afternoon, it was Tuppence Beresford with a dustcloth and a sense of moral purpose. Tommy, lounging on the sofa with the Times folded under one elbow, watched as she stood in the middle of their sitting room at South Audley Mansions, surveying it like a general about to issue orders. "Tommy," she announced, "this grate is a disgrace to civilization." He lowered the paper an inch. "If civilization depends on clean fireplaces, my dear, I fear we're already doomed." "Don't be flippant. Look at this ash build-up. Mrs. Perkins must have been blind for months." Tommy wisely refrained from mentioning that Mrs. Perkins had only been there a week. He had learned, after years of matrimonial and investigative partnership, that certain remarks shortened one's life expectancy. Instead, he offered, "Shall I fetch the tongs, or would you prefer to duel it personally?" Tuppence knelt, brushing back an errant lock of auburn hair, and began to clear the grate. Her movements were brisk, determined, and as often happened with her, half an inch from chaos. A puff of grey dust rose like stage smoke. She sneezed. "Heavens! It smells as if someone burned a novel in here." Tommy smiled faintly. "Possibly one of mine." A moment later she froze. Her hand, buried among soot and cinders, had struck something that didn't belong. She drew out a small, blackened bundle tied with faded string, fragile, irregular, still faintly warm, though the fire hadn't been lit for days. The paper edges were ashen, crumbling at her touch. "Tommy, look." He sat up. "What on earth?" "Letters, or what's left of them." She loosened the string gently. Inside were several half-burnt sheets, edges curled, handwriting spidery and elegant in the places still legible. The ink had run in patches, words blurring like ghosts trying to speak. One envelope retained enough of an address to make her gasp. "Colonel Desmond Blaine," she read aloud. "That name sounds—" Tommy's brows drew together. "Blaine. Good Lord. Yes, I remember something. Intelligence Branch, Western Command, 1918. Went down in a cloud of scandal, if memory serves." "What sort of scandal?" "The sort we weren't supposed to talk about. There were whispers of missing dispatches, coded leaks, and a certain woman who vanished conveniently abroad." Tuppence's eyes gleamed with that unmistakable mix of curiosity and defiance that made Tommy suspect all sense of domestic peace had just expired. And now, 25 years later, his letters turn up in our fireplace? Unless you've been corresponding secretly with the dead, it seems improbable. "Improbable," she said, "is precisely what interests me." They spread the fragments across the tea table. Afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, falling in gentle squares upon the scorched paper. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not unpleasant, but unsettlingly alive, as though the letters still smouldered in memory. Tuppence leaned close. "Here, you can just make out the date, February 1919. Tommy bent over. "Post-war, and see that phrase, Ashen House." "The truth must never reach Ashen House," she read slowly. "Now that's a phrase with backbone. Could be a code name, or a place. Either way," she said decisively, "it's an invitation." Tommy sighed, the long-suffering sound of a man who knew resistance was not only futile, but unmanly. "Before we dash off to rescue the Empire again, might I suggest lunch?" "Lunch can wait. History won't." She turned another page, finding a signature half lost to flame, Desmond Blair, the rest consumed. Below it, a blotch that might once have been a seal. "Someone tried very hard to destroy these. Or hide them," Tommy said. "Our grate's not exactly the Foreign Office incinerator." "Exactly. Which means someone, sometime, wanted them forgotten, and failed." She picked up one sheet gingerly. The bottom half was gone, but enough remained to tease the imagination. "Cannot keep it any longer. The orders came from above, but the guilt is mine. If they ever reach Ashen House, everything ends." Tuppence looked up sharply. "Tommy, doesn't that sound like a confession?" "It sounds," he replied, "like the start of one of your more dangerous hobbies." Their telephone, an obstinate relic on the writing desk, chose that moment to ring shrilly. Tuppence jumped, smudging ash across her cheek. "Don't tell me that's Scotland Yard already." Tommy answered. It was Albert, their long-suffering factotum, phoning from the garage. "Beg pardon, sir, but did either of you order a crate of old coal just delivered here? Man said it was for the flat upstairs, but he swore it had your name on the slip." Tommy frowned. "No, and tell him to fetch it back before Tuppence burns down Mayfair." When he hung up, she was still staring at the papers. Coal delivery, burnt letters, and a colonel's confession, coincidences piling up like dust on your golf clubs. He gave her a level look. "And you intend to do what exactly?" She smiled, the kind of smile that made him wish he'd booked that quiet seaside holiday he'd mentioned last week. Find out what Ashen House is, of course, and why the truth wasn't supposed to reach it. Tommy leaned back, crossing his arms. I can already hear the conversation. You, charming a butler into treason. Me, pretending to be a mild journalist. And before I know it, someone's shooting at us in the rain. There you go again? Weather pessimism. She tucked the bundle carefully into a biscuit tin. It's only the first step in a perfectly reasonable inquiry. I've heard you say that before, just before we were nearly drowned in that canal. This time, she said serenely, we have ashes for breadcrumbs. He regarded her fondly, then helplessly. My dear girl, you could make the Last Judgment sound like a garden party. I should hope so, she said. Now fetch your coat. We're going to the library. The library? Where else? One doesn't simply walk into Ashen House without knowing whether it's a manor, a madhouse, or a ministry office. We'll start with the local gazetteer. Perhaps it's listed under estates. Tommy surrendered. I'll bring the umbrella, just in case the heavens share my forebodings. An hour later they were on the marble steps of the Mayfair Public Library, the biscuit tin tucked discreetly under Tuppence's arm. She moved briskly between the stacks, pulling down county registries and wartime property lists, while Tommy charmed the elderly librarian into fetching tea. After 20 minutes, Tuppence uttered a small cry. Here, Ashen House, Hampstead Heath District, formerly requisitioned during the Great War by the War Office for Convalescence and Communications Storage. Tommy read over her shoulder. Now converted into what? Nothing recorded, but look, the proprietor listed in 1919 was a Miss Laura Blaine. Blaine, he repeated softly. The Colonel's niece. They exchanged a glance. The air between them seemed suddenly thinner, charged with the faint scent of smoke from those letters even now lying quietly in their tin. Tuppence closed the book. I think, she said, we should pay a call. After all, it's rude to ignore family connections, especially when they rise from the ashes. Tommy gave a short laugh. If civilization depends on clean fireplaces, he murmured, then perhaps we'd best see what's been swept under this one. And as they left the library, the biscuit tin rattled faintly under Tuppence's arm, as though the past, disturbed at last, had begun to stir. Promise me, Tommy said, as the taxi rattled up the quiet Hampstead Lane, that you will not accuse anyone of murder before the scones are served. Tuppence, impeccably gloved and radiant with purpose, gave him a serene look. I never accuse before the second cup of tea. It's unsporting. Ashen House came into view, a tall, ivy-clad manor crouched behind a gate of flaking iron. Its windows were half-shuttered, as though the house disapproved of the world. The brass plate beside the drive read, Ashen House Convalescent Residence, Proprietor, Miss Laura Blaine. The driver glanced back. They say that place used to belong to a colonel, military sort, burned half of it in the war, so I heard. Tuppence smiled faintly. How reassuring. Inside the gates, gravel crunched beneath their shoes. The garden was orderly yet subdued, like a smile maintained too long. A few convalescents sat in wicker chairs along the terrace, wrapped in blankets despite the mild afternoon. Their eyes followed Tommy and Tuppence with polite curiosity, or perhaps suspicion. A middle-aged maid, white-aproned and brisk, led them through to the drawing-room, where the scent of polish and lavender mingled faintly with something sharper, the ghost of smoke. Miss Laura Blaine rose to greet them. She was in her 40s, though the tremor of her hands and the pallor of her skin suggested older fears. Her gown was well cut but dated, as though time had stopped the day peace was declared. "How kind of you to come," she said with a polite smile. "You're writers, I believe?" "Indeed," Tuppence said warmly. "We're documenting wartime houses and their post-war histories, the quiet heroism of English bricks, so to speak." Miss Blaine looked faintly amused, faintly weary. "How patriotic of you." As they settled for tea, Tuppence observed the small details that her husband often missed: the scorch mark on the edge of the silver tray, the faint unevenness of Miss Blaine's breathing, and the way she avoided the portrait above the mantelpiece, a stern man in uniform, unmistakably Colonel Desmond Blaine. "That's your uncle, isn't it?" Tuppence ventured gently. "Yes." A pause. "He died in 1919. "Such a tragedy," Tuppence murmured, studying Miss Blaine's face. "We've come across his name in a few letters. Remarkable handwriting." For the first time, Miss Blaine's composure faltered. "Letters?" she repeated softly. "I thought they were destroyed." Tommy stepped in smoothly. "Destroyed? How curious. We heard they were mislaid." She laughed lightly, but her teacup rattled faintly against its saucer. "Old things should stay forgotten, Mr. Beresford. The past is a bad nurse." That was when the door opened and a large woman in starched white entered, balancing another tray. "Your tea, Miss Laura?" Miss Blaine seized on the interruption. "Ah, Mrs. Frobisher, my matron. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. She keeps us all alive." Mrs. Frobisher inclined her head, her expression that of a woman who tolerated no nonsense. "Sugar?" "Two, please," Tuppence said sweetly. "You must find running a place like this rather demanding." "It keeps me occupied," Mrs. Frobisher said shortly. "We do our bit for the War Office. Some of our gentlemen are—" She paused, eyes flicking toward Miss Blaine. "Former officers under observation." "Observation," Tommy repeated, feigning casual interest. "Convalescence," Mrs. Frobisher corrected quickly. "Nerves, mostly. The sort that never mend properly after wars." She turned away before they could press further. Miss Blaine's smile had grown brittle. "She's been with me since the beginning. Knows too much about my temper and too little about tact." Tuppence, pretending to adjust her gloves, let her gaze wander across the room, to the corridor beyond, where a dark wooden door stood conspicuously closed. There was a brass label on it, half worn away. "Study." No sound came from within. As the conversation turned to neutral topics, rationing, the decline of good tea, the absurdity of modern architecture, Tuppence allowed herself to drift toward the door, ostensibly to admire a painting. The keyhole gleamed faintly in the dim corridor. She hesitated, listening, nothing but the distant tick of a clock. Then, lowering herself ever so slightly, she peered through. For an instant, her eye adjusted to shadows, papers strewn across a wide desk, an inkstand overturned, and at the center a single document stamped in bold letters, "Secret." The next moment she heard a step behind her. "Mrs. Beresford?" Miss Blaine's voice was quiet, but it held a strange, strained note. Tuppence turned with an apologetic smile. "Forgive me. I was admiring your architecture. Georgian symmetry always enchants me." "Of course." Miss Blaine's hand rested on the doorknob as if to shield it. "Some rooms are best left closed. They hold memories that don't heal easily." Before Tuppence could reply, Mrs. Frobisher reappeared, clearing her throat. "Miss Laura, that visitor from the War Office telephoned again. Said he'll call by tomorrow." Miss Blaine's eyes flickered with unease. "Tomorrow, yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frobisher. That will be all." The matron withdrew, her shoes clicking like metronomes of disapproval. Tuppence, ever the diplomat, rose and said lightly, "We won't keep you from your official duties, but may we send you a few questions later, for our article?" "Certainly." Miss Blaine's tone was polite but hollow, "though I can't promise I'll remember much worth printing." When they stepped outside, the afternoon had cooled, the sky faintly amber through the trees. Tommy waited until they were beyond earshot before saying quietly, "So, a secret study, a trembling hostess, and a War Office visitor who can't keep to business hours. I call that a promising start." Tuppence's expression was thoughtful. "She said the letters were destroyed. That means she knows about them. And if she thought they were gone, someone must have tried to make them disappear. Perhaps our mysterious visitor did her the favor." "Or the opposite," Tuppence murmured. I don't like that scorch mark on the tray. And there was ash in the air, the same as in our fireplace. Tommy frowned. You're thinking she burned them herself? Or someone burned them for her, to hide something worse? As they reached the gate, a car passed slowly along the lane, a dark Austin with its curtains drawn. Tommy caught a glimpse of the driver's hat, grey felt, low-brimmed, face obscured. The car moved on without slowing. Someone's keeping watch, he muttered. Good, Tuppence said, her eyes bright. It means we're interesting again. He sighed, offering his arm. I did warn you not to accuse anyone before tea was over. I didn't, she said, slipping her hand through his. I merely suspected everyone afterward. They walked back toward the station, the sound of gravel crunching underfoot. Behind them, Ashen House stood silent, but in one upstairs window, a curtain stirred, as if someone had been watching them all along. It began with that curious sixth sense Tommy had developed during his years in intelligence, the prickling awareness that someone was observing him just a fraction too closely. They were walking along Hampstead High Street, the late afternoon humming with shop chatter and the clink of china from tea shops. Tuppence was discussing the scorch mark on Miss Blaine's tea tray with forensic intensity when Tommy interrupted her mid-sentence. Don't look now, he murmured, but we appear to have acquired an admirer. She froze, and of course looked immediately. Subtle as ever, Tommy sighed. Behind us, grey fedora, reading a newspaper upside down. Tuppence darted a glance into a shop window to catch the reflection. The man was neat, spare, and moved with an economy that suggested training rather than habit. His features were indistinct, too average, too careful. Well, she said lightly, either he's a spy or the worst window shopper in London. Or both, said Tommy. Let's test his loyalty. Fancy a cup of tea? They crossed to a small tea shop that smelled of cinnamon and furniture polish. A brass bell announced them as they entered. The man in the grey fedora followed a moment later, choosing a seat by the window, his paper open once more like a shield. Tuppence slipped off her gloves, then deliberately dropped one beside his table. The man stooped at once, polite, and returned it with a faint smile. His accent betrayed him. Soft, Central European, though difficult to place. Thank you, she said sweetly. You have a gift for noticing details. He inclined his head. It is my profession, perhaps. Before she could press further, he paid for his untouched tea and left, gliding through the doorway like smoke. Tommy rose. Right, we'll give him a lead, then follow. They hurried out into the street. The man was already halfway down the block, moving swiftly through the thinning crowd. They tailed him past a tobacconist across the road by a newsstand, until he turned abruptly into a narrow lane. When they followed, the lane was empty. Tuppence halted, breath quickened. Vanished, like an efficient magician. Tommy frowned. Not vanished, practiced. He knew we'd follow. Either he's warning us off or inviting us to chase. Then we shall do both, said Tuppence firmly. That evening, Albert was waiting at South Audley Mansions, polishing the hall mirror with the expression of a man who knew secrets were once again brewing. Evening, sir, madam, he greeted. I took the liberty of making inquiries about that fella you mentioned. Grey hat, foreign air, bit too quiet. Asked a pal in lodging management up Marylebone Way. Seems your chap took a room under the name Mr. Grayson. Tommy looked up sharply. Grayson, is it? That's almost witty. Albert continued, clearly enjoying himself. Paid cash. Said he was a commercial agent from Zurich. Didn't leave a forwarding address and just a lot of cigarette ends and one foreign newspaper. La Gazette de Genève. My pal thought that funny. Did he leave anything else? Tuppence asked. Albert shook his head. No, ma'am. Except an impression he weren't the sort who'd be staying long. Tommy thanked him and handed over a half-crown, which Albert pocketed with the solemn air of a man entrusted with national secrets. When he'd gone, Tuppence flung herself into the armchair. Well, we know he's from somewhere that prints accents on their vowels. That narrows it down to half of Europe. Tommy paced, and he followed her straight from Ashen House, which suggests he's connected to Miss Blaine or her mysterious War Office visitor. She tilted her head. Perhaps both. What troubles me is that he ran only when I spoke to him. He wanted us to know we were followed, until we acknowledged it. Tommy nodded slowly. A deliberate move, a warning, not surveillance. The fire crackled in the grate, a domestic sound oddly at odds with the tension thickening in the room. The biscuit tin containing the burned letters sat on the mantelpiece like a quiet witness. It was near midnight when the knock came, discreet but unmistakable. Tommy, in his dressing gown, opened the door to find no one there. Only an envelope lay on the mat, cream paper, unmarked. He brought it to the light. "Another admirer?" Tuppence called sleepily from the sofa. "Possibly," he said grimly. The envelope was sealed with wax, no crest, no return address. Inside lay a single folded sheet, and one of the Colonel's letters, perfectly intact, untouched by flame. Tuppence sat up instantly. "That's impossible. We only found the burned ones." Apparently someone had an unburned collection. He held it up. The paper was smooth, the ink unblurred, and the signature clear. Desmond Blaine. Across the top, typed in bold red letters, were 6 words. "Stop asking questions about Blaine." Tuppence stared. "Tommy, this is getting serious." He gave a short laugh. "It was serious the moment you decided to clean the fireplace." "Don't joke." She examined the letter more closely. "Look, the edges are perfect. This was preserved deliberately, not forgotten." Tommy frowned. "Then whoever sent it wants us to know they control the story. A warning shot, but also a clue." "A clue to what?" He pointed to the faint watermark near the corner. "British government stationery. Modern issue, post-war. So either someone at the War Office had access to these old files, or they're still keeping them." Tuppence rose and crossed to the window. The street below was quiet, save for the distant echo of a car turning the corner. She thought she saw a shadow detach itself from the lamplight, moving swiftly out of sight. "He's there," she whispered. "Our grey fedora." Tommy joined her. The street was empty now, but the sense of presence lingered, like the memory of smoke after fire. "Persistent, isn't he?" Tommy murmured. "Still, if he wanted us gone, there are easier ways. No, he's guiding us." "Guiding us where?" Tommy turned the letter over in his hands. "To Ashen House, or back to it. Whoever sent this wants us to dig, but only so far." Tuppence's eyes gleamed with familiar excitement. "Then we shall dig a little further. Very politely, of course." "Of course," Tommy said dryly. "We wouldn't want to offend espionage etiquette." Later, when the lights were dimmed and the house slept, the biscuit tin on the mantel reflected the faint glow of the dying fire. Within it, the burnt and unburnt letters lay together, fragments of a secret that refused to stay buried. Outside, somewhere beyond the lamplight, a match flared briefly, illuminating the sharp angle of a grey hat before vanishing into the dark. "Tommy, I'm going alone." It was said with that calm, conversational finality that told Tommy Beresford he might as well argue with the National Gallery. He lowered his newspaper an inch. "And deprive me of tea, stale cake, and revelations of treason. Unthinkable." "This isn't a social call," she replied. "It's delicate. A widow's memories need sympathy, not sarcasm. I have both in moderation." "Then use them elsewhere." She adjusted her hat in the mirror, dove-grey felt, perfectly poised, and added softly, "Mrs. Blaine deserves to be listened to, not interrogated." Tommy sighed, defeated by reason and experience. "Just promise me you won't provoke tears, or revolutions." "I never provoke revolutions before lunch," she said, and was gone before he could retort. The train to Richmond rolled gently through the suburbs, its rhythm steady and pensive. Tuppence watched London thin into trees and river bends, the morning light slanting across the carriage window. Somewhere in her handbag lay the unburnt letter that had arrived the previous night, Colonel Blaine's name stark against the warning. If anyone could untangle that warning, it would be his widow. Mrs. Blaine lived in a small upper flat overlooking a narrow green where children played cricket in the distance. The building had once been genteel, perhaps even elegant, but now its lace curtains were tired and its brass doorbell dull. The woman who opened the door looked as if she had once matched both, tall, still graceful, but wrapped in a cardigan that had seen too many winters. "Mrs. Blaine?" "Yes." The voice was low, cultured, cautious. "You are—" "Tuppence Beresford. I'm writing about post-war families and, well, your husband's service was mentioned in some archives." Mrs. Blaine regarded her steadily, then stepped aside. "Come in, Mrs. Beresford. I think you'd better have some tea." The sitting room was a portrait of faded dignity, fine furniture slightly worn, a piano that hadn't been opened in years, a single photograph of a man in uniform. The curtains filtered the light into a pale amber haze. "I'm afraid there's little I can tell you that the papers didn't destroy," Mrs. Blaine began, pouring tea with a hand that trembled only slightly. "But it's kind that someone still remembers Desmond." Tuppence leaned forward. "I understand he served in intelligence?" "Yes, though the less said about that, the better, even now." She smiled faintly, bitterly. Secrecy was the air they breathed, and perhaps that's why he suffocated in it. "Please, tell me about him." Mrs. Blaine's eyes softened. He was a proud man, too proud to defend himself when the accusations came. Near the end of the war there were rumours that he'd passed on coded material to the enemy. Nonsense, of course, but nonsense repeated often enough becomes truth in official minds. What happened? They convened an inquiry. Secret, naturally. He was never told the full charge. He resigned rather than stand trial. 3 months later he was dead. Heart failure, they said. The word hung between them like an unfinished verdict. "And you never doubted him?" Tuppence asked gently. "Never," Mrs. Blaine said fiercely. "Desmond could be many things. Stubborn, impossible, even reckless, but never disloyal. He'd been betrayed, Mrs. Beresford. Someone used him as a shield." "By whom?" She hesitated, eyes drifting to the photograph on the mantelpiece. "I've thought about that for years. There was one man, Lieutenant Harcourt, younger, charming, always around Ashen House when Desmond was stationed there. He admired my husband, or said he did. Then, one day he disappeared. No trace, no forwarding address, and shortly after the accusations began." Tuppence's pen paused over her notebook. "Lieutenant Harcourt," she repeated softly. "Yes, he used to bring papers for Desmond to sign. Sometimes Desmond would lock himself in his study for hours afterward. I never knew what was in them. When he died, all his records vanished. Every letter, every file. They told me it was a clerical error." "Or a cover-up," Tuppence murmured. Mrs. Blaine's smile flickered. "Call it what you like. I learned not to ask questions. The ministry was very polite about it. A small pension, a pat on the head, and silence. Women were meant to be silent then." Tuppence felt a flare of indignation. "And now?" "Now," said Mrs. Blaine, her gaze sharpening, "I'm old enough not to care what the ministry thinks. You came to ask about my husband, Mrs. Beresford. So let me tell you, he was a patriot. He discovered something, or someone, that frightened powerful people. They destroyed him for it." She reached for a small wooden box on the side table and opened it. Inside lay a handful of medals, a dried sprig of laurel, and a folded telegram. "This came 2 days before he died," she said. "He never showed it to anyone but me. It read, 'If the papers reach Ashen House, everything ends.'" Tuppence caught her breath. "That exact phrase appears in his letter, the one we found." Mrs. Blaine looked startled, then almost relieved. "So the letters still exist. I thought they'd burned them all. That means—" She broke off suddenly, hand pressed to her mouth. "You must be careful, my dear. Whoever guarded those ashes still watches." Tuppence's tone softened. "I don't frighten easily, Mrs. Blaine. But tell me, why Ashen House?" "It was his command post for a time, a quiet manor used for convalescents and codes, though it served other purposes too. Files passed through there, men came and went. After the fire, the place was abandoned. Only Laura stayed." "Laura Blaine?" "My husband's niece. Poor girl. She adored her uncle, but she had a weak heart and weaker friends. He left her the estate, such as it was. She tried to turn it into a home for officers. I don't think she ever forgave the ministry for what they did to him, nor, perhaps, herself." "She told me," Tuppence said carefully, "that old things should stay forgotten." Mrs. Blaine gave a small, tragic laugh. "Yes, because remembering hurts, but forgetting kills the truth." A silence followed, not empty, but weighted. The clock ticked. Somewhere a child laughed faintly from the green outside. Tuppence finished her tea, then rose. "You've been very generous, Mrs. Blaine. I promise we'll find out what really happened." The old woman looked up, eyes glinting with something between gratitude and warning. I don't doubt your heart, Mrs. Beresford, but hearts don't always survive in your line of work. Tuppence smiled, though the words chilled her faintly. We've both outlasted a few explosions. At the door, Mrs. Blaine caught her sleeve. Before you go, one more thing. If you ever hear the name Harcourt again, run. Run? Yes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They said Desmond betrayed England, but I know, her hand trembled, I know he was betrayed. Tuppence walked back toward the station under a pale, brittle sky, her mind crowded with fragments. Harcourt, Ashen House, the unburnt letter. Behind her, the windows of the Blaine flat glowed faintly, and she imagined the old woman sitting alone with her memories, waiting for justice that had never arrived. The words echoed in her ears as she reached the platform. He was betrayed. And as the train carried her homeward, she couldn't help feeling that the betrayal wasn't yet over. The plan, as Tommy put it, was perfectly sensible, assuming we aren't caught. Tuppence, buttoning her coat with brisk determination, replied, And if we are, you can claim we were chasing a mouse. Ashen House loomed ahead in the moonlight, an austere silhouette with a few windows faintly lit, the kind of place that seemed to resent visitors. The gravel drive glittered dully under the lamplight. Tommy halted at the gates, checked his watch and nodded. 10 minutes to midnight, not my favourite hour for social calls. Stop brooding, you're the distraction. I'm the archaeologist, Tuppence whispered. That's what they said before the pyramids collapsed. But she was already gone, moving low along the hedge, nimble as a cat despite her heels. Tommy sighed and approached the front door. A single electric bulb shone above it, revealing a neatly polished brass knocker. He gave it 3 polite taps. After a pause, the door opened to reveal the night porter, a stooped man in a cardigan that looked older than the Empire. His expression hovered between suspicion and sleep. Evening, Tommy said cheerfully. Beastly hour, I know. I'm from the Gazette, doing a follow-up on Ashen House's charitable work. Thought I'd, catch a late photograph. The porter blinked. At midnight. Best lighting, Tommy said solemnly. Soft shadows. Very atmospheric. The porter frowned. Miss Blaine didn't mention anything. She wouldn't. Surprise feature. National interest, you know. The man hesitated, torn between duty and confusion. You'd best speak with Mrs. Frobisher. Capital idea, Tommy said. Lead the way. As the porter shuffled down the hall, Tommy cast a quick glance toward the side corridor and exhaled a silent prayer that Tuppence was already underground. Tuppence had found the side entrance easily enough, a low wooden door by the old conservatory, unlocked as if forgotten. Inside, the air was thick with damp and age. She flicked her torch on briefly, narrow stairs descending into darkness, lined with flaking plaster and pipes that whispered faintly in the chill. Charming, she murmured. Just the place for a quiet evening's burglary. Her shoes made no sound on the stone. The cellar walls glistened faintly with condensation. Somewhere water dripped steadily, the rhythm quick and uneven. She passed rows of crates marked medical supplies and records, 1918 to 1920. A single light bulb flickered overhead, casting thin shadows like skeletal fingers. Then she saw it, half hidden behind a stack of coal sacks, a grey metal filing cabinet, its drawers warped from heat. The lock had melted slightly, as if once exposed to intense flame. Tuppence crouched, prying the top drawer open. It squealed in protest, then yielded. Inside lay a jumble of half-burnt papers, charred edges curling inward, ink bleeding into blackened patches. She lifted one carefully. The writing was faint but legible. Colonel Desmond Blaine, confidential report, Operation Ashenlight. Her pulse quickened. Beneath it were fragments of correspondence, a ledger, and, tucked between folders, a photograph. She drew it out carefully. The picture showed 3 people standing before Ashen House. Colonel Blaine, recognizable from his portrait, broad-shouldered, proud, the faintest smile under his moustache. Beside him, Miss Laura Blaine, younger and radiant, clutching a parasol. Between them, a third man, his face cut neatly out of the photograph. "Who did you upset, Colonel?" she whispered. Her torchlight caught something glinting on the back of the photo, a faint penciled scrawl. Harcourt, final proof. A noise stopped her breath. Footsteps, slow, measured, descending the cellar stairs. She switched off her torch and flattened herself against the wall, heart hammering. The light above flickered, dimmed, then steadied. A shadow moved along the corridor. "Torch out of order again?" a man's voice muttered irritably. It was unfamiliar, rough-edged. "Where's that switch?" The beam of another light swept briefly across the crates, closer, closer, then passed over the filing cabinet. The man cursed softly, something metallic clattering. Tuppence slid silently toward the far wall. A side door, half ajar, led to a narrow passage. She moved through it, praying the hinges wouldn't betray her. The door creaked faintly, but the man didn't notice. Then, disaster. Her handbag, caught on a splinter of wood, tumbled from her shoulder and fell with a dull thud onto the floorboards. The footsteps stopped. Tuppence froze. The man swore under his breath. "Who's there?" No answer. He advanced. She darted through the passage, emerging into another section of the cellar, rows of shelves, the air thick with dust. A faint rectangle of moonlight glowed ahead, an old coal chute. She scrambled up, pushed the rusted latch and squeezed through just as the footsteps reached the far door. Cold night air hit her face like a slap. She rolled onto the damp grass outside and lay still, listening. Inside, the footsteps halted at the spot she'd left. Then, silence, followed by the scrape of the handbag being lifted. She cursed softly. "Oh, splendid, my calling card." Meanwhile, Tommy's conversation with the night porter had deteriorated into a battle of stubbornness. Mrs. Frobisher had arrived, hair in curlers, expression thunderous. "A journalist at this hour? Ridiculous. What paper did you say?" "The Daily Enlightener," Tommy said promptly. "Small circulation, large morals." Mrs. Frobisher sniffed. "Never heard of it." "Then you've missed some excellent crossword puzzles." "I shall telephone Miss Blaine." Tommy smiled disarmingly. "Oh, I wouldn't wake her. National press etiquette, you understand. We abhor inconvenience. Just need a few exterior photographs and I'll vanish like a dream." Her eyes narrowed. "You're one of those inquisitive sorts, aren't you?" "My wife says so," he admitted cheerfully. "It's her cross to bear." The woman pursed her lips, then reluctantly relented. "Make it quick." "Splendid. I'll just step out for a breath of inspiration." He exited through the side door and nearly collided with Tuppence, emerging from the bushes, smeared with dust and looking pleased with herself. "Tommy," she whispered. "Quick, we have to go." "Not without explanation," he said, steadying her. "You look like you've been wrestling with coal miners." "Close. I found a filing cabinet. Burnt papers, photographs. Colonel Blaine, Laura and another man, face cut out." "Harcourt." "Almost certainly. And the cellar's not empty. Someone's down there. He found my handbag." Tommy whistled softly. There goes anonymity. A movement by the gate made them both turn. The same dark Austin idled across the road, engine purring. In the driver's seat, the man in the grey fedora sat smoking calmly, as though watching a play he'd seen before. "Persistent fellow," Tommy muttered. "He's the audience," Tuppence said quietly. "Someone else is writing the script." They retreated to the shadows as Mrs. Frobisher's voice echoed faintly from within. "Porter, did you hear that noise?" Tommy took Tuppence's arm. Time for a graceful exit. They slipped through a side gate and followed the narrow path along the fence until the house disappeared behind them. The road opened into a slope leading toward the heath. The car engine revved once, then fell silent. When they looked back, the Austin was gone. Later, in their sitting room, Tuppence laid the rescued photograph on the table beside the biscuit tin. "The missing face is our ghost," she said. "Whoever Harcourt was, he's at the heart of this." Tommy leaned over it, studying the careful cut, not torn in anger, but neatly excised. Professional work. Someone wanted him erased, not merely forgotten. And the cellar documents, all tied to Operation Ashen. That phrase keeps returning like a bad refrain. He frowned thoughtfully. "You realize that by now, half of Whitehall will be aware we're snooping." "Good," she said briskly. "Then they can stop pretending it never happened." He chuckled. "You do realize your handbag is probably being catalogued as evidence by someone very unfriendly." "Let them. It's mostly lipstick, toffee wrappers and a theatre programme, hardly espionage." Tommy poured 2 brandies. "Well, here's to our expanding fan club. The Ministry, Miss Blaine, an ex-lieutenant, and a mysterious man in grey hats." She raised her glass. And to Mrs. Blaine, who warned me that the betrayal wasn't over. She was right. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street, the sound distant but deliberate. Tuppence turned toward the window. "Tommy," she said softly, "do you think he ever left Hampstead?" He joined her at the curtain, watching the faint gleam of a headlamp vanish into the dark. "No," he said. "I think he's waiting for Act 2. Tommy Beresford, contrary to his reputation for leisure, had the concentration of a chess master when danger began to smell faintly of ink and paper. At that moment, his attention was fixed on a cluttered tea table, over which lay a chaos of scorched fragments, magnifying glass, and Tuppence's best tweezers. "Don't breathe too hard," he warned, "or we'll lose Blaine's confession in a puff of dust." "I'm breathing precisely as much as a woman with purpose," Tuppence retorted. She leaned forward, auburn hair escaping its pins, eyes bright with the sort of excitement that made Tommy half proud, half terrified. "Look at this bit. You can just make out Operation Ashen Light. I thought it was Ashen House at first." Tommy tilted the fragment toward the lamp. "Ashen Light. Sounds like a ministry code name. Scientific, perhaps. Something secret enough to bury under polite fires." "It's in the same hand as the Colonel's other letters," Tuppence murmured. "And see this phrase here, the formula cannot remain in his possession. That means stolen plans, not romantic nonsense." She looked up sharply. "Tommy, if the Colonel was accused of treason for this, he may have been trying to stop the real thief." "Which would make Harcourt our man," Tommy mused. "And whoever's tidying up now doesn't want that theory uncovered." He sat back, rubbing his chin. "Do you remember the laboratory reports I had to decode in 1917? This bit of cipher looks familiar. Try the first letter of every third word." Tuppence smiled. "I do love it when you talk espionage." They bent over the scraps, rearranging them carefully. Tuppence wrote down letters in her tidy, deliberate script. Alhazen. "Alhazen," she repeated. "That's Arabic, isn't it? A name?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Ibn al-Haytham, the Arab scientist. Optics, light, ashen light." She drew a breath. "Then the operation must have been scientific research. Something involving light, mirrors, lenses. Or weaponry," he finished grimly. "And if a traitor sold that research abroad, it would have been enough to ruin Blaine and bury anyone else who knew." The room was quiet, except for the faint tick of the mantel clock. Hodge, their cat, yawned indifferently on the armchair as though codes and conspiracies were beneath feline concern. Tuppence broke the silence first. "So this isn't just a family scandal. It's espionage. That means, Tommy interrupted, "we're out of our depth." "Don't be defeatist. We've been out of our depth since 1919. He smiled despite himself. "True, but this time the water's colder." Tuppence straightened the fragments. "We'll make it warmer by shining a little light. There's still enough here for Albert to photograph and enlarge. Then we can—" The telephone rang. It was an ordinary sound, yet in that quiet room, amid burnt secrets and the ghost of war, it sliced through the air like a bayonet. Tommy crossed to the desk. "Beresford residence." A moment's silence. Then a man's voice, hoarse and deliberate. "You have 1 day to forget Ashen Light, or join the Colonel." Tommy's grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" Click. The line went dead. He stared at the instrument as if it might explain itself. Tuppence rose, reading his expression before he spoke. "Another admirer? Not the kind who sends flowers." "What did he say?" Tommy repeated it. Her face paled slightly, then hardened. "So they know we've decoded something." "They know everything," Tommy said grimly. "Someone's been listening." He replaced the receiver carefully, then unplugged the wire from the wall. "That'll do for now." Tuppence stood still for a moment, thinking. If he said join the Colonel, he meant death, a threat, not advice. Tommy nodded. "Which means we're closer than we thought." She sat down, the humour gone from her voice. "Then let's assume we're under surveillance. Letters replaced, flat watched, phone tapped." "Comforting thought," he said lightly, though his tone was anything but. "I'll ask Albert to sweep the building. He can spot a bug faster than the Home Office." "Do you really think it's the Ministry?" "I think," Tommy said, "that whoever wanted Blaine's name destroyed had help from inside it." Tuppence stared at the ashes spread across their table. I don't like this new century, Tommy. Too many secrets pretending to be progress. Come now, darling, you were practically born for secrets. Yes, she said quietly, but not the kind that kill people decades later. The tension sat between them like a shadow. The faint hum of the city beyond their windows, traffic, a late tram, laughter drifting up from the street, only made the silence heavier. At last, Tommy poured 2 small brandies. You should sleep. I couldn't possibly. You must. You think better in daylight. So do spies, she said dryly. He lifted his glass. To tomorrow, then, the day we pretend to forget Ashen light. She met his eyes over the rim of her glass. And the night we don't. Sleep proved a polite fiction. Tuppence lay awake, tracing the faint outline of the coded fragments in her mind. The name Harcourt floated up, merging with Alhazen and Ashen light until her thoughts felt like smoke, circling, reforming, never settling. Somewhere in the early hours, she rose and moved quietly into the sitting room. The table lay just as they'd left it. She reached for the photograph from the cellar, the Colonel, Miss Blaine, and that missing figure, and held it near the lamp. The cut edge was precise, surgical. Someone had removed Harcourt's face as neatly as removing a name from a list. She whispered, "Who were you, Lieutenant?" Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned swiftly, but it was only Tommy, tousled and barefoot, carrying a blanket. "You'll catch your death," he muttered. "I can't sleep." "Nor can I." The brandy was all show. He sat beside her, following her gaze. "I keep wondering, why threaten us instead of eliminating us? A real professional would have sent a bullet, not a phone call." "Perhaps he's not professional," Tuppence said. "Perhaps he's afraid." "Of us?" "Of the truth." They sat together in silence. The clock chimed once. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Tommy took the photograph from her hand and studied it again. "That cut face. If we can find another copy, we'll know who he was." Tuppence nodded. "I'll check the war archives tomorrow, and perhaps have a word with Miss Blaine again." He raised an eyebrow. "Returning to Ashen House after midnight escapades? Bold." "Necessary," she said. "She knows more than she dares to tell." Morning arrived reluctantly, grey and thin, the kind of London dawn that looked apologetic. Albert appeared with toast, tea, and a conspiratorial expression. "Been poking around the hall, sir. Funny thing, 2 blokes hanging about outside since 7. Didn't look like meter readers." Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. Our shadows multiplied. "Want me to, deal with them?" Albert asked hopefully. "Not yet," Tommy said. "Just keep your eyes open, and if anyone tries to deliver another mysterious envelope—" "I'll deliver it back, special rate," Albert said with relish. When he'd gone, Tuppence said softly, "We're being watched in daylight now." "Yes," Tommy said, folding the decoded fragment and slipping it into his pocket, "which means the clock has started." That evening, after a day spent tracing records that mysteriously no longer existed, they returned home to find the flat door slightly ajar. Tommy drew a breath, stepped inside first. Nothing was overturned, no sign of forced entry. Yet every surface felt touched. Tuppence went straight to the mantelpiece. The biscuit tin was gone. "All the letters," she whispered. "They've been here." Tommy scanned the room, jaw tight. Efficient devils. They left nothing but fingerprints, probably ours. He crossed to the telephone and found the cord reattached. He lifted the receiver cautiously. Static, then a voice, faint but unmistakable. The same hoarse whisper from the night before. "I warned you." Click. The line went dead again. Tuppence exhaled slowly. "That makes 2 warnings." "And 2 mistakes," Tommy said. "They think we've lost our evidence, but they don't know we copied the code." She smiled, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Then let's make sure they never do." He nodded. "Tomorrow we go underground. Figuratively this time. We'll find Harcourt's trail, and whoever fears Ashen light enough to murder for it." Tuppence looked once more at the empty mantelpiece. The faint smell of smoke still lingered in the air, as though the ashes of old secrets had followed them home. The night was quiet in the way that unnerves Londoners. The hum of the city dimmed, as though the streets themselves were holding their breath. Tuppence awoke to a sound she couldn't name, a faint scrape, a sigh of wood, The whisper of movement not her own. Her eyes opened in darkness. For a moment she thought it a dream. Then came the unmistakable rustle of paper. She sat up sharply. "Tommy?" No answer. The shadow of her husband moved near the window, but the voice that came wasn't his. "Don't move," a low male voice said, steady and cold. Her breath caught. The bedside lamp flicked on, and in that sudden pool of light, Tommy appeared in the doorway, hair dishevelled, revolver in hand. The shadow by the desk froze. "Good evening," Tommy said lightly. "If you were hoping for the early edition, I'm afraid it's sold out." The figure moved fast, far faster than a common burglar. He sprang toward the window. Tommy lunged, colliding with him in a blur of motion and noise. A chair overturned, papers scattered like startled birds. "Stop him!" Tuppence cried, grabbing the nearest object, a brass candlestick, and brandishing it like a weapon. The intruder struck out, knocking the revolver from Tommy's hand. They grappled, crashing against the desk. For one instant, the light caught the man's face. Sharp features, hard eyes, the faint trace of a scar along his jawline. Then he broke free, dived through the half-open window, and was gone. Tommy rushed to the sill. The alley below was empty except for the echo of footsteps receding fast. Tuppence exhaled shakily. "Well," she said, voice trembling but defiant, "that was an unusually energetic bedtime story." Tommy bent to retrieve a small rectangle that had fallen to the floor. It was scuffed, official-looking, a laminated card with the crest of the War Office. "Identification," he murmured, holding it to the light. "Lieutenant Peter Harcourt." Tuppence stared. "The same name Mrs. Blaine mentioned." "Precisely. The dead man who vanished before the Colonel's disgrace." She looked at him sharply. "Tommy, that means that our late-night guest faked his death and came back to tidy up." He dropped into the armchair, breathing heavily, eyes fixed on the card. "Harcourt, the ghost behind every door we've opened, and now he's very much alive." Tuppence, still standing by the window, felt the chill of the night air brush her skin. "He could have killed us." Tommy's tone was dry. "My dear, if he wanted to, he would have. He was searching, not striking, looking for something specific." "The code fragments," she said instantly. "He came for the copies we made." Tommy nodded. "Which means he doesn't know they're locked in the desk at the office, not here." She gave a small, fierce smile. "Then we're still one move ahead." He rose and went to the door, locking it firmly. "Not by much, but it'll do until morning." They slept little after that. Dawn came pale and subdued, creeping in through the blinds like an unwelcome visitor of its own. Over breakfast, neither spoke much, Tuppence stirring her tea with unnecessary violence, Tommy rereading the identification card for the 10th time. Albert burst in at 9:30, red-faced and breathless. "You'll never believe it, sir. Miss Blaine's had an accident." Tuppence looked up sharply. "What sort of accident?" "Fell in her study, they say. Doctor from the village found her unconscious, said she'd tripped, but—" Albert hesitated, lowering his voice. "Police came too, said her papers were gone, the whole place turned upside down." Tommy exchanged a grim glance with his wife. "When?" "Early this morning, just before dawn." Tuppence stood, her chair scraping back. "Then it happened right after our visitor left." Albert blinked. "Visitor?" "Never mind that," Tommy said briskly. "Get the car, Albert. We're going to Hampstead." The road to Ashen House felt longer than before, perhaps because the sky had turned an unforgiving shade of white, the kind that made every shadow seem sharper. Tuppence sat forward in her seat, gloved hands clenched in her lap. If Harcourt attacked her, it means she had something he wanted. Or something she refused to give him, Tommy said grimly, and judging by her nerves last time, she was already halfway to confessing the truth. "She knew what Operation Ashenlight was," Tuppence murmured. "I'm certain of it." Tommy kept his eyes on the road. "Let's hope she's still alive to tell us." Ashen House was buzzing like a disturbed hive. A police car stood by the gate. A constable took notes under the watchful eye of Mrs. Frobisher, who looked thunderous enough to cow the entire force. When she saw them approach, she bristled. "Oh, it's you again. I might have known. The house isn't open to visitors." "We're not visitors," Tuppence said firmly. "We're here about Miss Blaine." Mrs. Frobisher's eyes narrowed. "She's resting. Doctor's orders. And the less talk about the night's nonsense, the better." "What sort of nonsense?" Tommy asked mildly. "Burglary, they say. Nonsense, I say. Nothing of value in this house except peace, and there's precious little of that left." "Still," Tuppence said, "if Miss Blaine's hurt—" "She'll live," Mrs. Frobisher snapped. "A bump on the head, that's all." But her tone was too defensive, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. Tommy softened his voice. "We're friends of the family, Mrs. Frobisher. Perhaps we could sit with her for a few minutes." The woman hesitated. 10 minutes, she said grudgingly. "And mind you, no questions, she needs quiet." They found Miss Blaine propped against her pillows, face pale, eyes half open. The room smelled of antiseptic and burnt dust, the lingering scent of upheaval. Papers still littered the carpet where the constables had searched. "Tuppence," she whispered faintly, "you shouldn't have come." "We had to," Tuppence said softly. "What happened?" Miss Blaine's fingers tightened on the coverlet. "He was here. He wanted the files, the old records. I told him they were gone. He said I lied." Tommy leaned closer. "Harcourt?" Her eyelids fluttered. "Yes, he's alive. He never died. My uncle trusted him. God help us all." "What was he looking for?" Tuppence asked. Miss Blaine's gaze drifted to the window. "The formula, the one my uncle locked away after Operation Ashen. He said it could blind cities if misused." Tommy exchanged a quick glance with Tuppence. "A weapon, then?" Miss Blaine nodded faintly. "A light so intense it could burn from miles away. He called it a deterrent. They called it treachery." Her breathing grew shallow. "Tell Mrs. Blaine," she murmured, "that he was loyal to the end." Tuppence took her hand. "You must rest. We'll handle Harcourt." But Miss Blaine's eyes had already closed. They left quietly, stepping out into the corridor. Mrs. Frobisher appeared instantly, blocking their way. "Well, satisfied?" "She needs a nurse, not a jailer," Tuppence said sharply. The woman stiffened. "Watch your tongue, madam. I've served this house since before you were born." "And yet," Tommy said coolly, "it seems every secret in it is slipping through your fingers." Mrs. Frobisher glared but said nothing. Outside, the air was sharp with the smell of pine and petrol. The constable by the gate saluted as they passed, his notebook open. Tommy slid into the driver's seat, thoughtful. "So, Harcourt's after a scientific formula, something Blaine developed under the code name Ashen. And now he's tying up the loose ends," Tuppence said. "First the letters, now Miss Blaine, we're next." Tommy gave a half smile. "You make it sound almost flattering." "Don't joke," she said quietly. "This isn't one of our usual adventures. These people aren't bunglers, they're professionals." "Exactly why we can't afford to run." He started the engine. "We'll find Harcourt before he finds us. And we'll start with what Miss Blaine just told us, her uncle's formula. Somewhere out there is a copy he didn't destroy." Tuppence stared out of the window as the car turned down the lane. The branches above cast fractured shadows across the bonnet, like the remnants of burnt paper. Behind them, Ashen House stood silent once more, its windows reflecting the cold midday light, an old fortress guarding the ghosts of its own making. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both felt it, the weight of unseen eyes watching from somewhere near the tree line, and the certainty that the night's visitor would return. The hospital smelt of antiseptic and lilies, and Miss Laura Blaine looked smaller in the white bed than she had propped up on her pillows at Ashen House. The matron said, "She asked for you again. 5 minutes only." Tuppence sat where she could be seen at once. Miss Blaine's eyes cleared. "You were right to come back," she whispered. "What I told you at the house wasn't the whole of it. I couldn't, not with Frobisher listening. He came for the same papers, the ones my uncle hid, and he said I had lied. He knew about the cellar and about the copy I kept. He called himself Harcourt." Tommy bent in. "Then we were right. He survived the 1918 fire." "Yes," she breathed, "alive, and still finishing what he began." He trusted him. Tuppence leaned closer. "Tell us what really happened, Miss Blaine. What was Operation Ashen?" Miss Blaine hesitated, fighting for air. "What he built was stronger than they admitted," she whispered. "Not just a field test, a beam that could blind a column, even scorch from a distance. He locked the final figures away because in the wrong hands it wasn't defense at all. A blinding weapon, non-lethal but powerful. It could disable whole platoons without bloodshed. He thought it would save lives, but someone wanted it sold, a double agent inside his own command." "Your uncle found him?" Tommy asked. her eyes filled with tears. He suspected. He gathered proof. Then the fire came. The flames began in the records room. He tried to save them, but the smoke. Her voice trailed off. Tuppence squeezed her hand. And they blamed him. Yes, the traitor framed him, burned the files, left evidence pointing to him. The ministry was eager to believe it. Easier to condemn one man than admit corruption inside their own house. Tommy's tone was low, controlled. Do you know who the traitor was? Miss Blaine's lips moved soundlessly. Then, with sudden urgency, she tried to raise herself, gasping. I must tell you, the name, before... The oxygen mask slipped sideways. She clawed weakly at it, but her fingers trembled too violently. Tuppence caught it, adjusting it back, but Miss Blaine's breath rattled unevenly. Don't speak, Tuppence pleaded. Save your strength. No, you must... No. Her hand gripped Tuppence's wrist with surprising force. The one who paid Harcourt was... The hiss from the oxygen line changed, sharper, wrong. Miss Blaine's eyes widened. No, he's here. Her body tensed, then went still. A scent, delicate but unmistakable. Bitter almonds. Tuppence froze. Tommy? He'd already noticed. His eyes went to the bedside table where a small glass ampule lay beside a tipped water carafe. He picked it up carefully. Empty. Someone added it to her oxygen or water. The nurse entered at that moment, startled by the monitor's flat tone. Oh, dear Lord. Tommy stepped aside, grim-faced. Too late. She's gone. Tuppence stood motionless, Miss Blaine's lifeless hand still in hers. The matron hurried in, snapping orders, calling for the doctor. The room filled with controlled chaos, screens flashing, footsteps converging, but Tommy and Tuppence already knew. Miss Laura Blaine had died not from her wounds, but from silence, enforced and permanent. They left the hospital an hour later. The night outside was raw, the lamplight sharp against the slick pavement. Tuppence's face was pale but determined. She was poisoned, Tommy, right there under supervision. Someone slipped in, quiet as a ghost. He nodded grimly. Almond scent means cyanide, fast and efficient. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Tuppence looked back toward the building. She was just about to name him. Yes, and he couldn't risk it. They walked in silence for several moments, the sounds of London distant, taxis, a far-off whistle, the shuffle of tired nurses. Tuppence said softly, "You think it was Harcourt?" "I think," Tommy replied, "that the man we fought in our flat left us his name for a reason. That ID card may have been a decoy. He wanted us chasing Harcourt while he cleaned up the rest." "But Mrs. Blaine swore Harcourt vanished. Miss Blaine said he's alive." He shook his head. "Alive or not, someone's using that identity. Perhaps even as Harcourt. An alias, a mask, a professional trick." Tuppence's jaw tightened. "Then we'll find the man behind the mask." The next morning brought rain, a thin, persistent drizzle that dampened tempers and newspapers alike. Albert arrived with the Morning Post and a face full of theories. "Doctor says Miss Blaine's death will be written off as heart failure," he announced. "Police won't look deeper unless someone pushes them." "They won't," Tommy said flatly. "Whoever did this has connections high enough to tidy it all." Albert frowned. "Then we push." Tuppence smiled faintly. "That's the spirit." She began sorting through Miss Blaine's personal effects, which the nurse had sent with them, by request. Among the modest collection, a rosary, a hairbrush. A faded photograph, but was a small, leather-bound notebook. Tommy opened it carefully. The pages were filled with initials, each followed by brief notes written in Miss Blaine's neat hand. "L.B., that's herself," he murmured. "T.B., Colonel Blaine, all dated years ago." He turned another page. "Here, D.H., payment received. No sum, just that note. Dated February 1919, the same month the fire broke out." Tuppence frowned. "D.H., we've seen those initials before, haven't we?" Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Yes. On the ministry files we checked last month. Sir Reginald Hale, defence head, D.H." "Then Hale received money connected to Operation Ashen Light," she said slowly. "That makes him the prime suspect." "Or the traitor," Tommy said grimly. Blaine discovered Hale was selling research data to foreign agents. When Blaine confronted him, Hale framed him, and now he's cleaning up what's left. Tuppence shut the notebook. That means Miss Blaine died because of Hale. Tommy stood, pacing. And it means Harcourt, if he exists, may have been his go-between. The man who carried the payments burned the files and vanished. Albert, who'd been listening intently, cleared his throat. "Beg pardon, sir, but if this Hale's the sort that plays with ministers, you'll never get near him." "Oh, we'll get near him," Tommy said, "but not as ourselves." Tuppence smiled, though her eyes were hard. A visit from a pair of harmless historians, perhaps, researching the patriotic legacy of Colonel Blaine. "Exactly." Tommy took her hand. "We'll give him the same courtesy he gave Blaine, a polite conversation, followed by a reckoning." That evening, the Beresfords sat by the fire, the small notebook open between them. The rain had ceased, leaving the windows streaked and reflective. Tuppence turned to a fresh page and began transcribing the entries. LB, TB, DH. There are other initials too, MP and PH, possibly subordinates. And look at this last one. Ashen light, terminated. Tommy's brow furrowed. Terminated. Could mean the project ended, or the people involved did. She nodded slowly. And the date is the day after the Colonel's death. The fire popped softly, the sound startling in the quiet. Tuppence stared into the flames. He tried to save his country, Tommy, and they killed him for it. Tommy put a hand over hers. Then we'll clear his name. That's more than the ministry ever did. She met his gaze. And if Hale really is behind this? He smiled thinly. Then he'll learn what it's like to be on the wrong side of a Beresford investigation. For a moment, the tension eased, and Tuppence leaned back with a weary sigh. "Do you think Miss Blaine knew she wouldn't live to finish her confession?" "Yes," Tommy said quietly, "but she trusted us to finish it for her." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere outside, a car engine started, idled briefly, then drove away. Tuppence rose and went to the window. "They're still watching." "Let them," Tommy said. "It'll save us the trouble of finding them." He closed the notebook, tucking it into his coat pocket. "Tomorrow we pay a call on Sir Reginald Hale." Tuppence turned from the window, her eyes glinting. "And this time, Tommy, let's not knock first." When Tommy Beresford decided to call in a favour, he did it with the calm precision of a man asking for sugar at tea, which, as Tuppence knew, usually meant trouble was brewing. "Sir Reginald Hale," he said, studying the address on the card, "Permanent Under-Secretary for Defence Coordination, Knight of the Bath, and a man who owes me precisely one favour from 1918. Tuppence looked up from the notebook spread before her. "The one involving the exploding typewriter?" "The very same. He swore secrecy for life. I intend to collect." "And what makes you think he'll tell you anything about Ashen light?" "Oh, he won't," Tommy said cheerfully, "but he'll try not to, and that will be infinitely more revealing." The Ministry of Defence was a fortress of marble, manners and secrets. Its corridors smelled faintly of polished floors and bureaucracy. A clerk led them into an oak-panelled office where Sir Reginald Hale rose from behind a wide desk, urbane and perfectly tailored, his expression suggesting surprise and the faintest irritation. "Tommy Beresford," he said, extending a hand that trembled just slightly. "Good heavens, I thought you'd retired to golf and gardening." "Temporarily," Tommy said. "But something brought me back. Allow me to introduce my wife, Mrs. Beresford, the sharper half of the operation." Tuppence smiled, studying him with polite curiosity. He was in his 50s, with silvered hair, a military moustache, and the kind of smooth assurance that came from years of evading responsibility gracefully. They exchanged pleasantries, wartime memories, mutual acquaintances, the inevitable question of whether London's traffic would ever be conquered, until Hale, satisfied the social courtesies had been paid, leaned back. "So then, Beresford," he said, "what brings you to Whitehall? You sound like a man with an itch." Tommy's voice was mild. "You could call it curiosity, about something called Operation Ashen Light." Hale's smile froze for an imperceptible second. Then he laughed, light and dismissive. "My dear fellow, you've been reading ghost stories. There's no such operation." Tuppence tilted her head. "Strange. We've come across quite a few references, and some rather burnt correspondence. A Colonel Blaine seemed deeply involved." Hale's eyes flickered, there and gone again. "Ah, Blaine. Yes, a tragic business. Court-martial, wasn't it? Treason charges, if memory serves. Awkward time for the ministry. Indeed, Tommy said softly. Almost as awkward as someone within that ministry taking payments under the initials DH. That did it. For one heartbeat, Hale's composure cracked. His knuckles whitened against the desk. What did you say? Tuppence leaned forward, her tone bright and innocent. Oh, nothing of consequence. Just an annotation in Miss Blaine's private notebook. DH, payment received. We assumed it referred to some accounting matter, but you never know. He laughed again, too loudly this time. Old gossip. Don't chase phantoms, my dear Mrs. Beresford. They tend to bite. Tommy rose, smiling pleasantly. Sound advice, Sir Reginald, though I found phantoms often carry very human fingerprints. Do leave this nonsense alone, Hale said sharply. You're meddling in things buried long ago for good reason. Ah, said Tommy, but buried things have a habit of resurfacing when the ground shifts. The silence that followed was dense, uneasy. Tuppence stood, fastening her gloves. You've been most helpful, Sir Reginald. Thank you for your candour. I've said nothing, he snapped. Exactly, she replied, smiling sweetly. Outside, they walked down the wide steps into the chill air of Whitehall. Tuppence's tone was brisk. Well, he all but confessed. Tommy nodded. He reacted to DH like a guilty schoolboy, and he's terrified of something, or someone, learning the truth. Then we follow him. Subtle as ever, he murmured. Subtler than you think, she said. He'll be cautious leaving the ministry. We'll need Albert to tail him from a distance. 2 hours later, the Beresfords were seated in a discreet black car a block from the ministry entrance. Albert was in position on his motorbike, cap low, chewing gum with exaggerated calm. At precisely 5 o'clock, Sir Reginald emerged. He paused on the pavement, checked his watch, then hailed a cab. Albert followed at a leisurely pace, weaving through traffic with the ease of a man born to espionage by way of delivery service. The cab stopped outside the Blenheim Club, a bastion of mahogany and moral ambiguity. Hale disappeared inside. Tuppence adjusted her hat. I presume the club doesn't admit ladies. Not usually, Tommy said, but it's remarkable what a change of uniform can do. Half an hour later, Mrs. Benson, a club waitress with an impeccable French twist and an accent borrowed from Ealing, was serving sherry in the lounge. Tuppence moved easily among the members, tray balanced expertly, her eyes scanning the room until she found Hale in a far corner, speaking urgently into the telephone. She drifted closer, pretending to adjust the vase on the nearby mantelpiece. Hale's voice was low but distinct enough to catch fragments. Yes, they've found the letters. No, not all, but enough. Yes, I've seen them. Beresford. Handle it tonight. Her pulse quickened. Handle it tonight. She replaced the vase, nodded politely to a passing member, and slipped out through the service corridor. When she rejoined Tommy in the car, her face was pale with contained excitement. He's calling someone, probably Harcourt. He said, handle it tonight. Tommy's eyes gleamed. Then we've got him. Hale's our DH. He paid for those secrets and arranged Blaine's downfall. And now he's arranging ours. Let's disappoint him, Tommy said dryly. Back at South Audley Mansions, the Beresfords worked with the efficiency of veterans. Tuppence spread telegram forms across the desk. Tommy dictated with a soldier's precision. 2. Sir Reginald Hale, Ministry of Defence. Message, Ashen papers to be published noon tomorrow. Recommend immediate statement to press to avoid speculation. She looked up. Signed? He smiled. Unsigned. Let him imagine who knows what. Sent from where? The Daily Herald office, naturally. That'll make him sweat. Tuppence rang Albert. Telegram's ready. Deliver to the ministry first thing tomorrow morning. Anonymous. And keep your head down. Albert whistled. Cor, you two do play rough. It's the only language some gentlemen understand, Tommy said. That night was restless. Every sound from the street below seemed magnified. The rattle of a cab, the shout of a newsboy, the slow toll of St. James's clock. Tuppence lay awake, listening to Tommy pacing quietly in the next room. At 11:30 he returned, his face thoughtful. He'll panic when he gets that message. Good, she said softly. Panic breeds mistakes. He sat beside her, taking her hand. We're close, Tuppence, too close for comfort. I'd rather be uncomfortable than uninformed, he smiled faintly. You always did prefer peril with your tea. Morning came crisp and colourless. At 10 o'clock, Albert reported back, brimming with excitement. "Delivered it right to his secretary, sir. You should have seen his face when he read it. Went pale as chalk. Bolted out of the office not 10 minutes later." "Where to?" Tommy asked. "Straight to his club, same place as last night." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. Then the fishes swimming into the net. By noon, they were seated in the coffee lounge opposite the Blenheim Club, half hidden behind a newspaper. Through the wide windows, they saw Hale pacing near the door, watch in hand. He looked 10 years older, his composure crumbling visibly. "He's waiting for someone," Tuppence murmured. "Or something," Tommy replied. "He expects news, perhaps from his accomplice." Moments later, a familiar figure appeared, the man in the grey fedora. He approached Hale swiftly. They spoke briefly, faces close, then both disappeared back inside. Tommy's jaw tightened. "There's our old friend." "The shadow becomes substance," Tuppence murmured. "What now?" "We wait, just long enough for the trap to spring." An hour passed. The club door burst open and Hale emerged alone, agitated. He looked up and down the street, spotted a nearby telephone box and hurried inside. Tommy rose. "Come on." They crossed swiftly but silently, stopping just beyond the glass panel. Hale's voice came through, ragged with panic. "No, listen to me. The letters are out. The papers will be published at noon. Yes, I've handled Blaine's niece. I said I've handled it. What? No, you don't understand. They've—" He broke off suddenly, eyes darting to the window. Through the glass, he saw them. Tommy's calm gaze, Tuppence's level stare. For a second, all three were frozen. Then Hale slammed down the receiver and bolted. Tommy was faster. He caught Hale by the arm just outside the booth. "Going somewhere, Sir Reginald?" Hale twisted free, face ashen. "You fools! You don't know what you're meddling in." "Oh, I think we do," Tuppence said coolly. "You're DH, the man who betrayed Colonel Blaine, sold Operation Ashen Light to foreign agents, and framed an innocent man to save himself." Hale's mouth opened, then shut again. "Prove it." Tommy smiled. "That's what the papers will do tomorrow, assuming, of course, you don't prefer a private confession." The colour drained from Hale's face. For a long moment, he seemed to consider bolting again. Then he sagged, defeated. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. "The truth," Tommy said. "Every word of it." Hale glanced around, then whispered, "Not here. Too many eyes. Meet me at Mirrington Square, midnight. I'll bring what you need to see." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "If this is another trap—" "It isn't," he said wearily. "It's an ending." Then he walked away, shoulders bowed, leaving them in the thinning crowd. Tommy exhaled. Midnight at Mirrington Square. Tuppence watched Hale's retreating figure. "And if he doesn't bring the truth?" Tommy's voice was quiet, steady. "Then we'll bring the trap." The press office at Mirrington Square looked nothing like the birthplace of a trap. It was small, untidy, and perpetually smelling of ink and stale tobacco, a world of typewriters clattering and editors arguing about commas. Yet Tommy Beresford, sitting calmly behind a desk stacked with mock telegrams and yesterday's headlines, thought it was the perfect stage for confession. He adjusted his tie with uncharacteristic precision. "You know," he murmured to Tuppence, "there's a fine line between journalism and entrapment. I rather think we've erased it." Tuppence, perched on the corner of the desk, smiled faintly. "I call it creative justice. Besides, I've always wanted to be front-page news." "Let's hope we stay alive long enough to read it," Tommy replied dryly. They had arrived an hour early, taking the office from a cooperative editor who owed Tommy an old favour. The telegram, their bait, had been sent the day before. Ashen papers to be published noon tomorrow. It had worked like a charm. Now, at precisely 10 minutes past 11, the echo of heavy footsteps climbed the staircase outside. Tuppence's voice lowered. "That's him." Tommy nodded once. "Showtime." Sir Reginald Hale entered, looking every inch the cornered statesman, hat pulled low, collar up, eyes darting like a hunted man's. His immaculate suit could not disguise the tremor in his hands. He closed the door behind him sharply. "Where are they?" Tommy smiled. "Good morning, Sir Reginald. How nice of you to call." "Don't play games," Hale snapped. "The Ashen papers. You have them. I demand to see them. Now." Tuppence folded her arms, voice calm as ever. Demanding things in other people's offices is terribly bad manners, you know." He turned on her. "You don't understand what's at stake." "Oh, I think we do," Tommy said evenly. "You framed an innocent man, sold British intelligence secrets to foreign agents, and let a loyal officer die under suspicion. We understand perfectly." Hale froze. "You have no proof." On the contrary, Tommy produced Miss Blaine's notebook from his pocket and laid it on the desk. "Your initials, your payments, and more than enough to interest the newspapers, or perhaps Parliament." Hale's composure faltered. He sagged into a chair, wiping his brow. "You think you're clever," he said hoarsely, "but you've no idea what it was like in those years. The war was ending, everything was chaos, orders came from everywhere, and no one asked who was paying whom." "Except you did," Tuppence said softly, "and you made sure the payments stopped with you." He looked at her sharply, and for the first time, guilt, or fear, showed nakedly on his face. "Blaine discovered it. He confronted me, said he'd report it to the ministry, but the project was already compromised. Foreign hands were involved. If the scandal broke, it would have destroyed what was left of our intelligence service." "So you destroyed him instead?" Hale stared at him, then at the Beresfords, and finally sank into the chair as though his bones had given way. "Tell them," he said dully. "Tell them I was trying to protect England." Tuppence's voice was steady, cold. "By selling her secrets?" He didn't answer. He just stared past her at something no one else could see, a memory perhaps of fire and papers turning to ash. An hour later, the office was nearly empty again. Prentice stood by the window, hat in hand, as constables led Hale away. "Efficiently handled," Tommy remarked. Prentice smiled faintly. "You saved us a great deal of time. My orders were to watch, not intervene, but you forced his hand neatly." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "And the mysterious Operation Ashen light?" Prentice gestured toward a small metal case on the desk. "Blaine's diary, the real Ashen papers. They contain details of a scientific project, yes, but more importantly, a coded record of Hale's payments and correspondence with foreign agents." Blaine hid the truth in plain sight. Tommy looked down at the case, the metal cool under his fingertips. "So he died disgraced while his honor sat buried in a drawer." Prentice nodded. "Justice comes late sometimes, but it comes." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Miss Blaine's murder will be avenged. I give you my word." "Thank you," Tuppence said softly. He inclined his head and left, disappearing into the corridor like a shadow dismissed by daylight. When they stepped outside, the afternoon sun was breaking through pale cloud, casting Mirrington Square in a strange, forgiving light. Newsboys shouted headlines, a dog barked somewhere, and life went on, as it always did after secrets died. Tuppence took Tommy's arm. "Do you ever think," she said thoughtfully, "that the world hides too many Ashen papers, too many buried truths waiting for a curious fool to stumble upon them?" He smiled. "If it didn't, what would we do with our time?" She laughed softly. "Probably quarrel over the breakfast marmalade." He squeezed her hand. "A safer occupation, but less interesting." They walked on, unhurried, blending into the square's quiet rhythm. Behind them, in the now empty press office, the light glinted off the metal case left on the desk. The Ashen papers, still and silent, their story finally told. And outside, the wind turned a page of the discarded telegram by the door, the last false message of a game that had revealed the truth. Mrs. Blaine's upper flat in Richmond looked exactly as it had on Tuppence's first visit. Lace curtains, polished but tired furniture, and the narrow green below the window. The air smelt faintly of coal smoke from a neighbour's fire, heavy with the smell of autumn roses and smoke from a neighbouring chimney. It was the same modest flat, belonging stubbornly to another time, where tea was poured into thin china and grief wore pearls instead of tears. Tommy and Tuppence stood at the gate for a moment before entering. The brass bell on the door gave a gentle ring as they stepped inside, bringing with them the faint chill of the outside air. Mrs. Blaine rose from her armchair with surprising speed for a woman of her years. Her white hair was arranged neatly, though her face bore the fragile calm of someone who had been waiting too long for bad news. "You've found something," she said, her voice trembling between fear and hope. Tommy inclined his head. "We have, Mrs. Blaine, and it's not bad news. Not this time." Tuppence stepped forward, holding a slim parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "These belong to you, or rather, to the Colonel. The original letters. They've been authenticated by the Ministry this morning. The accusations against your husband are being withdrawn. His name will be cleared in the official record." For a heartbeat, Mrs. Blaine did not move. Then she reached out and touched the parcel as though it might vanish if she breathed too quickly. "After all these years," she whispered, "after so much shame." Tommy's tone softened. "Your husband was no traitor. Quite the opposite. He risked everything to protect this country from one. We've recovered proof of that." Tuppence added gently, "The papers tell the story in his own words. His diary entries, his codes, his warnings. He knew the truth might be buried, so he hid it in plain sight. It was his way of leaving justice a trail to follow." Mrs. Blaine sank slowly into her chair, the letters resting in her lap like a lost piece of her heart returned. Her hands trembled as she untied the string, revealing pages browned with age but still legible. His voice caught in ink, alive again. "I can hear him," she said quietly. "The way he wrote his reports, neat, exacting, always the soldier, even with his pen." Tuppence smiled. "He would have liked that you kept everything tidy. You saved the ashes, Mrs. Blaine, and in them we found the truth." The old woman gave a watery laugh. "You sound like a poet, my dear. I'm just glad someone finally listened." Tommy took a seat opposite her. The afternoon light slanted through the lace curtains, catching the dust motes as they drifted lazily in the still air. "Colonel Blaine's honour will be restored at the next ministry review. Major Prentice himself is overseeing the report." "Major Prentice?" Mrs. Blaine repeated faintly. "Ah, yes, that quiet man who used to visit during the war. Always polite, always listening. I thought him long gone." "He has a habit of turning up at the right moment," Tuppence said wryly. Mrs. Blaine's eyes brimmed with tears. "I wish my husband could have known this, that the truth survived the lies." Tommy hesitated, then said softly, "Perhaps he did. He left the proof for someone to find. Maybe he trusted that one day someone would." There was a silence filled only by the small, human sounds of the house, the ticking of the mantel clock, the faint hum of the kettle just beginning to simmer. Tuppence stood, crossing to the fireplace. "A chill in the room," she said, striking a match. "Let's have a bit of warmth." Flames caught quickly, licking through the kindling. The smell of burning wood filled the air, clean, familiar, unthreatening this time. She watched the fire bloom, its orange light dancing across the Colonel's restored papers. "Funny thing about ashes," she said quietly. "People think they mean endings, but sometimes they're what's left when the truth refuses to stay buried." Tommy looked at her with an expression that was half amusement, half pride. "You're getting philosophical in your old age." "Old age?" she said, mock indignant. "I was being lyrical." "Same thing," he said lightly, and she gave him a look that promised retribution later, possibly in the form of cold supper. Mrs. Blaine chuckled softly at their familiar bickering. "You two haven't changed, have you? Still chasing mysteries, still arguing about who's cleverer." Tuppence smiled. "It's how we keep the marriage alive." "And the cases," Tommy added. "One can't work without the other." The kettle whistled gently from the hearth, and Tuppence poured the tea, steady and comforting. The three of them sat together, the past settling quietly around them like old dust. For the first time, Mrs. Blaine's smile was unguarded. "It's over then, truly over." Tommy nodded. "As much as such things ever are." She looked into the fire, her expression far away. "He was a good man. He loved his country, and me, even when the country did not love him back." Tuppence reached out, squeezing her hand. "Then that's what will be remembered now." Later, as they stepped back into the street, the sun had dipped low, throwing long golden shadows across the cobblestones. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and the first whispers of evening. Tuppence drew her coat tighter. "You know, I think that's the first time we've walked away from a case without feeling entirely cross." Tommy smiled. "Give it time. The paperwork from Prentice will ruin the mood soon enough." "Speaking of which," she said, pulling a folded slip from her pocket, "we nearly forgot. This was waiting in the post downstairs this morning." He raised an eyebrow. "From whom?" She handed it over. The envelope was unmarked except for a small grey smudge on one corner, the kind that might come from the brim of a hat. Tommy unfolded the note and read aloud, "For services rendered, the ministry owes you a lunch." It was signed simply, AP. Tuppence laughed. "Major Prentice, of course, never one to waste words." Tommy slipped the note into his pocket with a grin. "A lunch on the ministry. I wonder if that means sandwiches in the canteen or something at the Savoy." "With our luck," she said, "probably the canteen, and they'll expect us to pay the tip." He offered her his arm as they walked toward the station. "You know, Tuppence, we've just exposed a decades-old conspiracy, survived an armed confrontation and restored a man's honour. What would you like to do next?" She thought for a moment. "Something simpler." "Such as?" "A seaside holiday," she said firmly. "Somewhere with deck chairs, terrible postcards, and no mysterious men in grey hats." Tommy chuckled. "I'll see what I can arrange, though knowing us, we'll probably only manage 2 days of peace." Tuppence sighed with theatrical despair. "If we do, I'm sending it straight to the ministry, along with the bill for the lunch they owe us." He laughed and she joined him, their voices mingling with the sounds of early evening, the passing motor cars, the chatter from a nearby tea shop, the simple, comforting rhythm of London returning to itself after secrets and smoke. As they turned the corner, the light from the sunset caught in Tuppence's hair, setting it aglow. "Come along, Mrs. Beresford," Tommy said, smiling. "Let's leave the ashes to rest." She squeezed his arm. "For now, Mr. Beresford. Only for now." And together they walked on, two silhouettes fading into the warmth of twilight, partners in mischief, in truth, and in the quiet satisfaction that some wrongs at last had been made right.